Hello everyone, today we are talking about chapters 27 through 28 of To Kill a Mockingbird. These chapters are honestly pretty self-explanatory. Obviously they are important to the book's themes, but today I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I'm going to assume that you guys can jot down in your packets how these chapters add to the themes of the book, and instead I'm going to focus on something pretty basic. Plot structure. I mentioned last week that To Kill a Mockingbird really doesn't have a simple plot structure. For one, our story begins sort of at the climax, and then most of the book is told as a flashback. But also, the climax of the story is often mislabeled. And even though I specifically told you guys that the trial is not the climax of the book, over a third of you still put that as the climax of your story in the quiz I gave you a few days ago. So that happened. Anyways, I'm going to map this out for you. So make sure you pay attention all the way through to the end. All right. So we're used to seeing a plot structure that is pretty symmetrical, but ones shaped like this are sometimes more accurate to the book. And especially for To Kill a Mockingbird, this is still a pretty standard plot arc with your exposition or introduction, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. Interestingly, our story begins with this line. When he was nearly 13, my brother Jem got his arm badly broken at the elbow. This is the very first sentence of the book, which should be a pretty big flashing light to us that this is super important moment in the book. And we are going to trace the plot structure to figure out where this event lands. But before we get started with that, I want you to be aware that it probably lands somewhere inside this red circle because it is the first sentence of the book, so we know right away that it's probably pretty important. So this is the first sentence, is our entrance point into the story, but then we go a few years back and we spend a lot of time learning about Maycomb and the people who live there. We meet Dill and Walter Cunningham and Burris Ewell, who has lice at school, and we meet Miss Maudie and Calpurnia and the Ewells in general. But then we also get into some pretty interesting stuff about Boo Radley in the beginning of the book. And for a while, it seems like our whole story might in fact be about him. And so we're going to put him as one of our major plot points in our rising action. We have quite a few chapters in which the kids put on plays about Boo Radley. They find gifts in the tree. Mr. Nathan Radley seals up the tree. They try to touch the house. They try to send Boo a note on the end of a fishing pole. Basically, there's a lot of stuff going on at the beginning of the book that has to do with Boo Radley. But then around chapter 9, things start to look a little bit different. That's when Atticus' case comes into the story, and we start seeing the people of Maycomb react in different ways. You get some thematic development in the next chapters with racism and prejudice. Leading up to Tom Robinson's trial and in the trial itself, we also have a lot of examples of our themes: don't judge a book by its cover and standing up for what you believe is right. With that, you also have Aunt Alexandra going on and on about how important it is to come from a good bloodline, her idea of heredity, while only a few chapters later, Atticus is defending Tom from a lynch mob who also believes that some people are inherently better than others. We also have the trial itself, in which you have Mayella testifying out of fear of her father and social isolation. You have Tom Robinson being clearly innocent. But then you also have the jury judging that Tom is guilty, which is clearly unjust, and it totally crushes Jem's understanding of justice. And here is where a lot of people get tripped up. The verdict of the trial is not the climax of the story. There is still a lot going on that feeds off of the building tension in this portion. We might call it a little mini climax, but there's still more rising action before we get to our tipping point. And by not having everything start to resolve after the trial, Harper Lee is showing you that even when Mr. Ewell, the white man, wins, it doesn't mean that everything is resolved and over. And in fact, that's very far from the truth. Shortly after the verdict, there is Tom Robinson's death, which is still not the climax of the story. And then you have a whole lot of very heavy-handed discussion about hypocrisy with the missionary circle and Hitler. And then it's Halloween. And here is where we finally get to the story of how Jem breaks his arm. Because this is the very first sentence of the story, Harper Lee is using the story of Jem breaking his arm as a framework through which we read the rest of the story, which might sound weird, but hear me out. Every single event in the story comes to a tipping point when the kids are attacked by Mr. Ewell on their way home from the Halloween pageant outside the Radley's house. That is the final moment where the Ewells directly antagonize the Finches. And that is also a significant moment in the kids' understanding of Boo Radley, but we'll get to that more on Monday. Also, Scout is looking back on her childhood as an adult in this whole story, and we're hearing the story mostly through the eyes of a child. So all of the stress and anxiety over Atticus's involvement in the trial is justified in this single moment when they are attacked. And so Scout begins the book at this moment by saying that this is the story of how my brother got hurt so badly, I thought he had died. Did you guys catch that she asked like 4 different people if Jem was dead? This is a huge moment in her life. And by framing all of the introduction and rising action as events leading to 2 young kids getting attacked, Harper Lee is making the point that prejudice, injustice, and hypocrisy hurt everyone eventually, even kids. They harm every aspect of a community. But there is still good and there is still hope so long as innocent people are willing to step up and lend a hand. But we'll talk a lot more about that on Monday. So plot structure can be super interesting and fun. Congrats to those of you who actually watched this whole video. But more content on Monday. Content. What have I become? Am I like, I make content now? This is weird. But hang in there. Keep doing your homework, you guys.